In today's lesson, we will be using fronted adverbials, beginning with a range of conjunctions. The key terms that we'll be thinking about are the main clause, adverbials, subordinate clause, conjunction, and phrase. So let's look at today's focus text. This is the sort of text that you might find in an adventure story, where it's trying to build up interest in the reader. So it says, "For a moment, as the lightning lit up the night, she saw a figure in the doorway. Although it was just a glimpse, Abby thought it was him. She needed to get closer so that she could be sure." Pause your video now, have a look back at the text, and see if you can identify the main clause in each sentence. The main clause is the part that makes sense by itself. Pause the video now. Okay, you can see by the way I've underlined it that there are three main clauses in this passage. She saw a figure. Abby thought it was him. And the third one, she needed to get closer. Now, what about the rest of that passage? What is the function of the rest of the text? Can you tell me about the other parts of the sentence? For example, do we have subordinate clauses? How are they starting? What can you tell me about the rest of the sentence? Have a think about it. Pause the video, have a think. As you can see, I've added some boxes around certain words. Now, these words are conjunctions. Now, these conjunctions help us to add more detail. All right, so we have these subordinate clauses that begin with these conjunctions. So we have, as the lightning lit up the night. So the conjunction is beginning it. Although it was just a glimpse. There's our subordinate clause that begins with a conjunction, although. So that she could be sure. There is our subordinate clause, and it begins with the conjunction, so that. Okay, let's have a little bit of a closer look at that first sentence. "For a moment, as the lightning lit up the night, she saw a figure in the doorway." I have underlined two parts of that sentence. I have done this because I want to help you to tell the difference between the different types of adverbial that we have in this sentence. The two that I have underlined at the moment are what we call adverbial phrases. For a moment, in the doorway. These are phrases and not clauses because they do not have a subject and a verb. Compare that with the part of the sentence that I have underlined now in red. As the lightning lit up the night. Now this is an adverbial clause because it does have a subject, the lightning, it's about the lightning, and a verb, lit up. Okay, so we've got that. It says, as the lightning lit up the night. So that's an adverbial clause, subject and verb. Whereas the other adverbials are adverbial phrases because they do not have a subject and a verb. Okay, let's sum up. An adverbial clause and an adverbial phrase. Let's have a look at the difference. In this slide, we can see that the adverbial clause tells us more about the action or the event in the main clause. It develops the idea in the main clause in some way. It might tell us a little bit more about how something happens, why something happens, where something happens. It develops that idea, tells us more. Okay. The important difference between the clause and the phrase is though the adverbial clause must have a subject and a verb. The subject is the thing it's about and the verb what it's doing. When we look at the adverbial phrase, it's very similar because it tells us more about the action or the event in the main clause. And it also develops the idea in the main clause. So again, it tells us a little bit about where something happens, when something happens, why something happens, you know, these sort of things. But the adverbial phrase does not have a subject and a verb. So you might get things like in the jungle, adverbial phrase. I hope that helps. Have a go yourself at writing some sentences with subordinate clauses and some subordinate phrases. Make sure that your subordinate clauses are going to start with a conjunction when you try them, and see how you get on. Do not forget to put in your punctuation, things like commas, to separate the adverbial phrase, adverbial clause from the rest of the main clause.